Okay, so let's say, for instance, I'm given a task to create a page where all the students are going to, display. That means all the students. Normally, as a lecturer, you're supposed to have some students that are under your supervision. Okay, now since the system is going to work for the entire department, now each lecturer will have an account, each lecturer that is supervising projects, then students are going to be assigned to lecturers, and when they are assigned to lecturers, the student will also see their supervisor. At the same time, maybe communicate with the supervisor. Okay, now, but for the sake of this tutorial, I just want to, just like I said yesterday, a follow-up to the Zoom meeting that we had yesterday. I just want to create a fresh uh, page and a component and some components to accompany it, so that I can explain the structure of how the whole Laravel view thing works for those of us that are not very used to it. Okay, so I'm going to create a fresh page and add some components to it, so that when you are asked to do the same thing, maybe for a start, you might not be creating pages, maybe they will just give you the task of creating some few components. Okay, that means you'll be faced with sorry, you'll be faced with creating components and the designs. That is how the UI of the components looks like. Okay, so now I'm going to create components for the lecturer view users. Okay, so the first thing first, like with the description yesterday, I'm first of all going to the navbar component, because that is where this whole navbar thing is. Okay, so I'll go to my code. Let me first of all clean up the whole thing. That's what I've done so far. So now, like I said, we'll be working on the resources, the JS folder. Then here we'll have all our pages. Okay, now within the pages, I think I included the side nav and the nav bar here. Now the nav bar have all the menu, just as you're seeing it here. Okay, now we also did some restriction. I showed you restriction yesterday, like you can see here. User type lecturer. That means every list that is inside this template will only be displayed to the lecturer, while every list that is inside this template will only be displayed to students. Okay, so now I want to create, yesterday I was skeptical about doing this, because I said we were going to review from this review projects, review corrections there as well. So let me just change this route to, like, say, my students. Okay, my students, that is where the lecturer will see all his or her students. Okay, now to create my students, let me just as well change the icon too. I also told you yesterday during the Zoom meeting that the way we use font awesome, we have to include the library here. Okay, so now I'm simply just going to use a shortcut, the shortcut that I normally use. I'll just come to this library.add and find the particular fonts that I want to use. Okay, let me just say I said I want to use users, FA users. Okay, now when I see the FA users, the users is for solid icons. As you can see here, the model is coming from solid icons. Okay, so if I click on the FA user, automatically it's going to add itself to the solid icon. You see the users here. It was not here, but when I added it from on the library, automatically, though this one might be based on my system, but I have some of these extensions in VS Code already installed that are helping me to do one or two things. But in case your own, when you put the user here, it didn't come up, you have to, first of all, know where it's coming from. Is this from solid, or is it from regular, or is it for brand? Okay, though I've not included brands here. Okay, so wherever it's coming from, you have to add it here on the import statement before adding it on the library. Okay, so when I do this now, I know that it's coming from solid icons, so I'll have to change here instead of R, which stands for regular, I'll have to change it to solid, and I want to use the icon users. Okay, so with this, by the interface is set. Okay, it is the interface is set, but the route is not set yet. Okay, so when I refresh this, you see I have my students. Okay, but if you watch what's going on, the route is still going to edit content. Okay, edit content, so we have to create a new route for it. So now to create a route, I'll go to my route folder. Okay, I'll go to my route folder. For now, we're dealing with web, so I don't have any routes for students here. Okay, so I can create a new route. Let me just copy and paste one of these routes here. Then I can give the route the URL my students, which is what the user is going to see when it's browsing. Then I can name the route as well, saying let's name it my students. Okay, why I'm using my students here, because maybe later we might want to do another page that will show all the students instead of just the set of students. Okay, so this is my students. Now, apart from this, changing the routes, you can see that I'm still rendering the profile page. Okay, render profile page. So what I'm going to do here now is I'll go to the pages. Okay, that's this pages here. I'm going to create a new file on the pages, and I call the file my students. Okay, so when I create my students dot view, okay, now this will be my new page. So when I've created this new page, what I will now render here is not no longer profile, but will be my students. Okay, sorry, I'm supposed to use S because it doesn't really matter depending on how you named your component. Okay, but I'm going to just rename the component and add S to it. Okay, so now that I have my students here, I can simply go create my normal templates. Okay, okay, then create my normal templates, then create a view. Let me just add a H2 first and say my students. Okay, so sorry about my spelling. Okay, I'm going to change that. Okay, so now that I've created a new page called my students in the pages, okay, and I also directed these routes to my students components on the pages, then I gave it a name, routes, my name, my students. Okay, so what I'll simply do is I'll get this name of this route, go to my navbar and use it as the route that this page is going to go to, that is my students. That means the hyperreference to route to my students. Okay, now for this class here, what I'm simply doing here is that if you watch what's going on here, the current page that you have a different styling from other pages. Okay, so that is just what I'm using to get active pages. Okay, so that is what I'm doing here, is that I'm simply trying to check if the current route that we are is my student. Now let it have active classes, else just have the ordinary classes, and that is defined within the data section of my components. You can see active classes and classes. Okay, so that is just it. So it's just a way of getting active class. So I'll simply save this, and when I save this and my system, my app compile, I will simply refresh this. When I refresh this, when I click on my student, it goes to my students. That is the new page that I've just created. Okay, now also yesterday I talked about the app layout. Okay, they just like I'm trying to review everything I said yesterday during the Zoom meeting, and at the same time use it to work, create an element, create a component. Okay, so now yesterday I also talked about the layout, that the whole structure of the application is on this layout file. So now, because everything is on this layout file, any page that we create, that is the major page, not the components. Okay, because when you are creating those smaller components, you don't need to extend the app layout. Okay, but for the main page, that is like this one we're creating now, is a main page. That's a page that will have other internal contents in it. Okay, so from the main page we have to extend the app layout by bringing the app layout into our page. Okay, so when I bring in the app layout, okay, you can see it's imported from the layout directory. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do here is to register the components by just saying components. Okay, so components, then I will simply put the app layout as the component I'm registering. So with this, I'll have the structure of my app set for me already. Okay, so I have set the structure of the app. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is the heading, because the heading here is also injected into the app layout through what they call the slots. Like you can see here, the slots. Okay, so with these slots, I can inject what I want. That's the content of the content of this guy that's supposed to be at the top here. Okay, through a particular template elements. Okay, so now the thing is here now, what I will simply do is that I will simply create a template. Okay, in the template, I'm going to name the template based on the name of the slot. The name of the slot is header, so I'm going to give the template hash header. Okay, so this will simply tell the template that, okay, anything I put here, let's say I put anything here, for instance, that anything is going to be injected into the app layout, into the slot name header in the app layout, and it's going to give me this. Okay, pardon me opening both the other browser where I have the students parts. Okay, so you see I injected anything here. Okay, so what I'm simply going to do here is I'm going to copy one of the stuff I've done before. Let's say like just the way it is here now, I'm going to copy it so that to save the time. So let's say I'll copy from the profile page. I think I injected this whole thing into it. Okay, so I'll go to my student, then paste it here. Then after pasting, I can change this guy to my students. Okay, sorry for my spellings. My students. Sorry. Okay, so I'll also change the icon to solid icon and to be users. Okay, so with this, I'll have my heading sets. Okay, yeah, my students. So now that I've created this, now the remaining thing is the content of this page. What will be the content of this page? Okay. Okay, so creating the contents now, which is what actually makes each part of the page different from each other. Now, but everything is still injected within the app layout. As you can see, is my app layout. Okay, so everything that I'm going to do will also be injected into the app layout. Now, if I open the app layout for you again, you see a particular slot. I talked about this yesterday too. Now, every other template that does not have a name, just like this one have a name now, every other template or any other element that is created within the app layout, okay, every other element that is created or every other thing that you put inside the app layout will automatically be brought in by this slot. Okay, so therefore anything I create again here would also come here to stay. If I refresh this, you see everything I just typed now. Okay, so it's left for us to now design or create the content of what is going to be here accordingly. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new new content of what will be there. Now, the first thing first I'm going to do here is try to create, let's say, something like a bar at the top that we can use to, you know, maybe we can put something like a search, because we're trying to create students. Okay, so now this is another thing here is that you have to be familiar or know how to use your Tailwind classes very well. Okay, so now I'm going to bring in some Tailwind classes. So another thing again is if you're working, it should be good, because sometimes let me close this. Sometimes you cannot really have all the syntaxes in your head. So what you do is you can go to Tailwind documentation. Okay, go to Tailwind.css or go to the Tailwind itself. So now when your Tailwind is open, now you want to do anything that you're not sure about the syntax, you can simply come to search, or you click on the search, you search for anything you want to search for. Let's say I want to search for padding. Okay, when I want to search for padding, I simply type padding. When you come to padding, it will take you directly to padding, where you see all the classes that you can apply in padding. Okay, so that's just it. So now I'm going to create a div, and I'm going to pad div. If you watch what we have here, we need padding to separate this content from the wall. Okay, so I'm going to create a div. Okay, within the div, I'm going to pad it. Let's see, padding X is going to be okay, let's say the padding S is going to be 5, y, the padding y. Okay, we can adjust this actually, we can adjust them later. Better still, let me do something here. I think we have something set up in the dashboard already, so let's just go with this, what we have in the dashboard here. Okay, so I'll just copy this. Okay, so paste this so that we have a uniform contents. So now I'm just going to remove this welcome component. Then I can create my own component, but first of all, let me create something like a a card that will take the whole available width there. So let's say for the search, we might use it for something better than search, but let me just put it there way. So I'll say div, okay, dot, I'll give it a padding y, of let's say 3 or 5. Then I'll give it a padding x of 5 as well. Okay, then I'll give it a background color bg white, as well as I give it a shadow. Okay, then I'll also give it a border rounded, sorry, yeah, border rounded. Let's see, sorry, I think it's just rounded. This is what I said. So if you're not too sure about how the particular class you need, what you just need to do is to go make reference to your Tailwind documentation. Okay, so this is exactly what I need. Okay, but I think the margin from the top is too much. Okay, so but for the side I think it's okay, and the rounded is too much as well. So I can say rounded, let's say SM. Then the padding y is too much, so I have to reduce it to maybe 8. Okay, so another thing is to confirm if they have padding 8. Okay, I think they have it, which is 2RAM. Okay, so with that we can simply refresh our page and see what we've got. Okay, I think this is okay. Okay, so now that I've gotten this, the shadow as well, okay, I can leave the shadow. This will be up to you guys that will be designing the interface. Okay, so the only thing I just need is the interface should just be beautiful. And another thing again, you see the color scheme we're trying to use. I showed you that image yesterday, that this image, this is what we're trying to do. So you, sorry, so what you do is you check the image from time to time and see the color scheme. But the major thing is, you can see it's just blue, trying to use blue. Okay, so now I think I'll have to reduce the shadow a little bit. So I'll simply say shadow SM. Okay, so I'll reduce shadow a little bit. I think I don't even see any difference with it. Okay, but let's go with what we have. Okay, then apart from this, the next thing I'm going to do is I'll try to create some card. The card will be where the students, since we say all our students, we're going to create a card for all students. Okay, so what I'm going to use for the card is that I'm going to use a grid. Okay, so now using a grid, okay, I'll have to bring in another div here. Okay, so this div, I'm going to give it a class, a grid. Okay, then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to give it the number of columns I need in the grid, as well as the gaps. Okay, so I'll simply say grid columns. Okay, let's say I need by default I need 1 column. Okay, now why I need 1 column is because of responsiveness. Okay, so by default I need 1 column. Then I can also say at MD that is at a medium screen, from medium screen up, sorry, from small screen up. Okay, I need grid to be columns, number of columns will be 2. This is mobile responsiveness now. Then from MD up, that means okay, from small screen to MD, okay, 2 column will do. So let me just go for LG. Okay, let me go for LG. Then grid the grid hyphen columns hyphen, let's say we need 3 columns. Okay, so then the gap, okay, let's say I just need a small gap between the columns, so let's say 3. Okay, now the last thing I'm going to do is that I'm going to give this margin y, that means the margin top or bottom should be 5, so that it will give space from the component at the top, at the same time the components at the bottom, sorry, the element, sorry. So with this I can simply have, let's say, some div. Let me just give them colors, let's say BG red, let's say 200. Okay, let's say times, let's assume we have 10 columns. Okay, so if we have this, sorry, let me do something again. Before I say times 10, let's give them a padding so that we'll see what's going on there. So let's say dot padding of 3 times 10. Okay, so if you have this and I refresh my page, you're going to see that we'll have multiple grids. Okay, sorry, I think the background color should go for the other background color again. Come in, let's see. Okay, okay, I think I'm doing something wrong here. Okay, let me just wipe out everything again and start all over. So I will simply wipe these guys. Okay, so first and foremost, this PG white is supposed to be for this guy. So let's leave this out for PG white so that we'll see what's going on. So we know that, okay, this is the only person that have PG white. Then let me also give this guy a background color, let's say red, like I gave to the children before, 200. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'll pad this guy a little bit so that we'll see what's going on in it. Okay, so here I think okay, this results of the static behavior, static positioning of every element. You know, when you don't have a height in the element, it's supposed to is not supposed to show up until you have maybe a content in it. Okay, so just like you see here. Okay, but the truth is what we're trying to do here. Okay, so better state, this is a better way to do this. Okay, let's say this guy, keep this guy within here, then I do this. Okay, so now within here, this will be the cards. Okay, So this time around, I think we have something different. Let me do something again. Here, this rounded, I'm going to leave it out since I'm giving this guy rounded already, because you can see it's bringing this shadow here, but actually we just want to see the one for that the white background as you're seeing there. Okay, I guess that's the shadow that's making the whole thing look like as if the one I did before, I reduced the shadow to small the other time and I didn't really see effects, so this is what's causing it. Okay, so if we refresh this now, I think we're going to have different segments. Okay, we have different segments now. So, but we're still going to adjust this. We're still going to adjust this. So adjust this to what we did before. That means we have a normal shadow, we have a normal rounded. Okay. So now for here, we're only going to give this guy, since it's the first element, padding top of Y. Okay, so let's say padding bottom will be separately, and we'll make it a smaller one, that is P3. Okay, then I can even say P1 and do margin bottom, that's MB, let's say MB3. Okay, so but for the next one that follows, because of the gap between these two parts, now as you can see, I'm going to remove the padding here and just do margin bottom, let's say 3. Okay, I think I made a mistake here. Margin bottom 3. Okay, so okay, I'm also going to remove the shadow and the rounded edges. Okay, so when I do that, I will simply see what we have here. Okay, I think it's good to go, but except for the shadow, we have to increase the shadow of this guy a little bit. So I'll say shadow, let's say LG. Okay, shadow LG. Okay, let me see what the borders will look like. But never mind, let's just go straight to what we're trying to do actually. So now for the grid system, I will simply go to my tailwind and go to grid. Let's say the grid column is also column. I think grid columns, template columns. Okay, now this is how the grid work. Okay, I'll have to specify, like the example here, I have to specify grid, the grid columns, that's the number of columns and the gap between each of this grid. Okay, so and if I want to do mobile responsiveness, I think I missed the S before. I don't know. So let's try this again. So the first thing first here, okay, sorry, it's supposed to be here. The first thing first here is we'll need the grid container. So what I'll simply do here is that I'll simply say grid. Okay, then we say we need grids with colons. Okay, I think that's what I missed before. 1. Okay, now we can simply say we need a gap of 3 between each of these columns. Okay, so the gap is simply the distance, that's the margin that they give from each other. So let's say, assuming I have a div, like I say, the padding of this div is 3 all around. Okay, and I have, let me make use of, sorry, let me first of all put maybe a BG color of, let's say red, let's say 200. Then I'll have it, let's say 4 times. Okay, so with this, let's see how it looks like. Okay, as you can see, I have the 4 elements, 4 elements there, which is the 4 grid. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to say the mobile responsive part of it. I'll simply say at MD, that means from a medium screen, the grid columns that we need in a medium screen are column 2. Okay, this simply means that from medium screen to wider screen, irrespective of how wide it is, we're going to have 2 columns. Okay, so this will automatically share the whole thing into 2 columns. Okay, so now also we want to say for a wider screen, not just the medium screen, now we need the grid to be 3. Okay, so we need the grid to be 3. So same thing, similar to what we've done already here. We'll just say 3. Then we'll simply say, instead of from MD, we'll say from LG. Okay, so from LG, we'll have 3 columns in our grid. Okay, and so have 3 columns. So if we're talking about mobile responsiveness, if I go to my mobile phone, let's say, go to my mobile phone. Currently, I'm in an iPad. An iPad is part of medium screen. You can see that I have 2 columns there. Okay, so if I go to maybe a smaller screen, you see I have 1 column. Okay, then if I go to let's say a laptop. Okay, let me use this. Okay, so if I go to a wider screen, it becomes 3 columns. A medium screen becomes 2 columns. A smaller screen, it becomes 1 column. Okay, so that is just how it is. Okay, so for mobile responsiveness, that is why we have these guys. Okay, so what we're going to do now is this. Each of these guys will be the container that houses the student details in such a way that we just bring maybe the student picture, the student full name, then the level of the student, as well as maybe some other basic details. Now when we click on the card, it's going to take us to the entire profile of the students. Okay, when we click on the card, it's going to take us to the entire profile of the students. Okay, so now what I'm going to do here, I think I'm going to add a little margin more to these guys. Let's say 4 at the bottom, 4 at the bottom, 4. Okay, and the gap between these cards, I'm going to increase it to 4 as well. Okay, so now the thing I'll need here is just 1 card actually, because the card will get the students. We're going to loop through the students and duplicate the card according to the number of students that we can fetch from our database. Okay, so I'll just first of all build the card the way it should be. Okay, now the thing is this. Working with your Tailwind, you can actually build that. So let me not just, because from what I've seen now and the time I've spent much time in just creating the content, that is the design of the template. But actually, this is what almost every of us can do. Okay, so I'll go straight to the actual functionalities, how we can add more components into our page, how we can make requests and get feedback, and how we can feed those feedback into the content. I think that is what I should be more concerned about. Okay, so before I do that, let me just do a little rounded here. Okay, don't mind me. So and this will be the card for each of the students. Okay, so now for me to get student details out of this, I'm going to call my HTTP client. That means I'm going to import I'm going to import my HTTP client from my mixin. That's where I stored it. Then I have my HTTP client there. Now I'm going to import it as anything I want, but I like using the name as well, HTTP client. Okay, so this is how I can make requests. Okay, I can make requests and get something back. Okay, now here I'm going to use the mounted the mounted. Okay, on the mounted I want to call a particular method, and the method will be inside the method object. Okay, so now this method I want to call it, let's say, fetch students. Okay, fetch students. Okay, now inside the fetch student, this is where I'll now pull all the record of students. Okay, now here I'm going to have on my data method, I'm going to return return students. Okay, I'm going to return students as an empty array. Okay, and I return student as an empty array. Sorry for the mind. Now on mounted, when the component is mounted on the page, I'll simply fetch the list of students. Okay, now how do I fetch the list of students? That means on mounted, it will call these functions. Okay, this function, that's this method that you're seeing now, is going to call it. Okay, now calling it up, now what will this method do? Now this method is simply going to send a request. It's simply going to send a request to the backend, requesting for all the students that have been stored by the system. Okay, so I'll simply use my HTTP client here. Okay, so now when it calls this fetch students, now this fetch student is going to use this HTTP client. Okay, now on the HTTP client, okay, let me do something here. Let me call it HTTP. Okay, though it doesn't really matter, the name you import it as is what you use it as. Okay, so I say HTTP dot client. Now I can simply specify any request. Okay, what I want to do here is that I want to make a post request. Okay, now the post request that I'm going to make it to, let's say, a particular route that is called fetch students. Okay, let's say fetch students. Okay, now why I'm doing this like this now is because of the fact that we've not actually created where we differentiate the students based on their supervisor. Okay, that will be the work of the back-end engineers. Okay, back-end engineers are going to create maybe extra tables that can differentiate each student and their supervisors. Okay, so but for now, since we don't have anything like that, what I'm doing now is I just want to fetch all the students. Okay, so later on we're going to change the logic, and instead of fetching all students, we're going to fetch the students that relates to this particular supervisor by sending data as well, because we're supposed to send data which supervisor you are trying to get uh, his or her students. Okay, now though I will not be sending, I will not be doing that, but something came to my mind that okay, let me just show us as well if we want to send data with this uh, uh, particular lecturer currently, particular lecturer. How do we send the lecturer's details with the student? Okay, so now here I'm going to define the active user. Okay, the active user. Okay, to check if the active user is a lecturer, okay, or not. Okay, so, or let's say my student. Okay, normally my student, like what we did here, my student will only be seen by a lecturer. So already, if we're on my student page, we know that it's a lecturer that is accessing it. Okay, since we know that the lecturer is the one accessing it, what we're just trying to get now, we'll just get the lecturer's ID. Okay, that's the ID of the lecturer that is logged in. Okay, so what we'll do here now, normally what view did here, let me show you something. Okay, let me just show you something. Now if I come to this mounted and I log, let's say I log let's say this dot dollar page. Okay, if I log this page, you're going to see that view came up with the details about what you see in this page. Okay, like the user, the routes, the host name, and a lot of other things. Okay, as you can see, current route name, error bags, and also view. Okay, so if you click on the user, you're going to see everything about the user, the first name, the last name, the user type, and what we're interested in is the user type, which will tell us if it's a lecturer or a student. Okay, so what we're simply going to do now is from this user objects on the page, we're going to get the user type. Okay, sorry, we're not getting the user type, but we're getting the ID. Okay, we're simply sending the ID of that lecturer to the database as well. That means as we're making the request, we send the lecturer's ID. Okay, so let's just say the user ID. Okay, user ID will be equal to, that means we'll assign this guy, that is this page. So I'm going to just log the user ID here. For what we saw already, user ID is 1. Okay, so we're just going to log it there to see if we're going to get 1 at the end of the day. So we'll simply say dot user, okay, sorry, dot user dot ID. Okay, so this is what we'll get. So when we refresh the page and we log this whole thing again, we'll simply get 1. Okay, simply get 1. That is the user ID, lecturer ID, or the user ID. Let's just leave it like that. Okay, so now the user ID, since it's here, we can as well send it as data into our database through this post request. Okay, now I'm going to remove this log now and continue working with the fetch. Okay, now on this fetch students, I made a request, but the request I'm making, I also did something very interesting in the request. Remember, one of the projects we're supposed to work on is supposed to be two-sided, that is mobile and the web part of it. Okay, so and because of that, we're supposed to use an API to kind of make requests to the application, so that both the mobile app and the web app will be using the same back-end code. Okay, so because of that, if you watch what we did in this HTTP client that we declared, that we defined in the mixin, we simply directed it to the API routes. As you can see here, directed it to the API routes, and the API routes are simply, if you go to your route file, you're going to see the api.php instead of the web.php. Now you're going to see the api.php. Okay, so this is where it should be going to. Okay, so what I did is, when a user is logged in, it will generate a token. To generate a token, if we go to our dashboard, I think I did that on the dashboard. Okay, now if you go to the dashboard, when a user is logged in, it will store a particular token in the local storage. That means your browser local storage is going to store a token. If the token is null or the token is empty, it's going to make a request to generate a token. Okay, and when it generates a token, it's that generated token URL is coming here. Okay, so when it generates a token from here, it hits from this API, it hits the home controller generate token. Now the home controller is going to create check the particular user that is sending the request. Okay, now when it checks the user, it will kind of find the user from the database. Now when it finds the user and it gets the user, it creates an access token. Now this is made possible because of this authentication mode within Laravel. Okay, I talked about the middleware I think yesterday we were on the Zoom meeting. Okay, so now it will create an access token, return the access token as plain text back to the dashboard, okay, to return it back to the dashboard, and the dashboard will have to store it into its local storage. Okay, so we have that token on the local storage. Now that we have the token on the local storage, if we go to our navbar, we'll have the logout routes. Now when the user is trying to log out, we have to destroy that access token. Okay, so that anytime the user logs in, it will create an access token. Then when the user logs out, the access token will be destroyed. Okay, now this is the same thing. Why I did it like this is because if we want to maybe have a mobile endpoint, now these are the same thing the mobile application is going to. That means the mobile application will have to log in through the token. Okay, that means when it's logging in, it will create a token for the particular user. When it creates the token, anytime the mobile application wants to send a request, okay, that is the most interesting part. Look at this. Okay, now that I want to send a request here that to destroy the access token, I have to create some headers. Okay, now sending requests to a guided route, because every other route here is guided. As you can see, middleware, the destroy token is guided. I tend having more than one route that are guided by the authentication middleware. Okay, like I also explained yesterday, the middleware is for authentication. It is responsible for guiding access. That means the authorization, the valid user, validating the user if the user is logged in or not. Okay, so if the user is not logged in, it's not going to allow the user go through this. Any routes that you place here will be only for a logged in user that can access that route. Okay, so but for us now, for us to access that route, we are going to use the token as part of the header. That means the authorization, like as you can see on the navbar, the authorization here in the header is going to take the token as a bearer token. Okay, so now when we are sending this request, we're going to send the request with that header. okay, as part of the HTTP credentials. Okay, so this is exactly what I'll do for every request that I want to make to a secured route. Okay, every request I have to make to a secured route, I will have to place an header for authenticating that particular route, so that the route can be allowed through the middleware. Okay, so what I'll do here simply is I will simply copy this. Now another thing again is for us to, we should be able to differentiate between the get request and the post request. Okay, for those of us that are not really familiar with it, now the get request only will accept two parameters. The first one will be the URL, while the second one will be the header. Now the header is optional, okay, because if I'm not trying to get through the authenticated routes, I don't really need the header. Okay, that means in a get request I can simply do this. Okay, now if I want to pass data through a get request, I'll simply do the normal way that we do in the normal conventional coding pattern, where you have where a particular variable is equal to a particular value. Okay, that is how I pass data through the get request. Okay, but for the post request, on the other hand, okay, the post request on the other hand, the post requests have three arguments that will be passed to it. The first one will be the URL, just as we've passed. Then the second one will be the data that we are passing with the request, while the third one is going to be the headers. Okay, now this is the three things that a post request. That means in a post request, you don't need to pass the data like this. Okay, it's on the get request or maybe a delete request that we can pass the stuff like that. Okay, now for our headers, I'll simply paste what I copied from the other side. That's the HTTP credentials. Okay, so that we can have access to the routes, the guarded routes. Okay, through the local storage token. Now for our data we are sending just the user ID with it, even though we are not using it now. So I can say I can still declare variable something like let my data, okay, or I can simply say data, okay, is equal to an object. Okay, now on the object I'll simply say I want to save the user ID, okay, sorry, user ID, okay, or I can just, this is just like a variable, I can just say lecturer ID depending on how I want to use it. Let me just call it lecturer ID is equal to, that means I'll assign this particular user ID to it. Okay, so I'll simply say user ID, that's this to user ID. Okay, so this is my data. Now if I have to send more than one kind of data, maybe more than one data, let's say send a series of data, I'll simply accumulate them in the object by using a comma. Okay, then I'll put the next one. Okay, the next object, the next, sorry, data, I'll put its value. Okay, just like that, and so on and so forth. Okay, so that's I'll send multiple data. Okay, so we'll have this header. I think I don't know, maybe I might declare this guy as a window value. That's a window variable, so that we can have access to it anywhere we want to. Okay, so that we don't define this every time we want to make a request. We just simply bring it from the windows. Okay, I think we can do that, but let's leave this the way it is for now. So, okay, so we are fetching students and we're passing the lecturer ID as the data with this token to the fetch students request, which is a post. Mind you, we don't have any routes like this yet, okay, in the API.php, so we'll have to create it. Now creating it, we have to guide it with the middleware. Okay, so I'm going to create route, a post route. Okay, now the post route, the URL is going to be fetch students. Okay, now fetch students, I'm going to go over to the home controller. Now, as time goes on, we might need to create different controllers for different purposes. Like we can create student controller, lecturer controllers, depending on what we do. But as time goes on, we're going to know if we need different controllers for some of these things so that we can separate uh, uh, logic. Okay, but for now, I'm going to use the home controller for this. Now, let's say here, okay, I can simply still call it the same name, but it doesn't really matter. The name, what I specify here should be a name of a function that you can find in the home controller. Of course, you can see we don't have any function like that. Okay, so I'm going to simply create a function, call it this. Now the function is going to be of type request, okay, because it's a HTTP request, and HTTP request is handled by this, which is already imported into the page. Okay, request, then I can give it a name. Okay, I like calling it request too, but it's a name. You can give it any name of your choice. Okay, so now if you watch this, this is going to give us everything about the request. Okay, everything that is coming with the request. Okay, so for clarity's sake, I think I did something like this yesterday too. I don't know, but for clarity's sake, let's just first of all return the request so that we see what actually we have on the request. Okay, return the request. So what's happening here now is this guy will make a request, HTTP post request to this fetch student, and this fetch student is going to hit for this route, okay, and go to this controller. This controller will now get the request and return whatever we want to get back to this my student page. Okay, so now this is just the request. Now the next thing we're going to do is still on the request, we'll have the then method. Okay, the then method is just like, okay, if after, okay, like, okay, if we're used to Agile, just like the success method. Okay, success method. What's next? If you hit the request, then what happens? Okay, now when we hit the request, we are going to get a response back from the request. Now the response we're going to get, we're going to pour it into a function. Okay, now what I'm going to do here is that I'm going to log the response so that we'll see what we have. Okay, we send a request, okay, to this guy, and this guy will send the request back as the response. Okay, now for the controller part, this should be done by the people that will be handling the back end. So the major thing that the people that will handle the front end will do is, if you know the route that you are going to send the request to, you know the kind of data that you are going to get back. What you just be concerned about is how you are going to use the data that you get back from each of these requests. Okay, so but let's first of all see what we'll get back here. Okay, so if I refresh this page, okay, if I refresh this page, now what do I get back? I get this back. Okay, now you can see different things I got back, but out of everything I got back about the request, there's a particular key called data, where all my actual data that are actually coming back from this back will stay. So anything I'm returning from this back will be, sorry, will be on this data key. Okay, like for instance, if I'm to return something like just a string, let's just say hello. Let's say I'm not returning the request. Let's just say hello, for instance. Okay, so if I refresh this page, on the data key, that is where you're going to see hello. Okay, so everything is on the data. So if you want to get the actual data you are getting from the backend, you're supposed to say response dot what data. Okay, response dot data will give you the actual data that are coming back from the back end. Okay, so we just get hello. Okay, now so now let me just do a simple one here. Now for this lecturer, I'm going to, I'm not using anything from the request yet, because when we fetch student to fetch lecturer, we use the lecturer ID like I said, but for now, we're just going to fetch all the students, okay? So now, I want to fetch all the students. I'll simply say, declare variable, let me call it students. Okay, sorry, yeah, students, okay? So the students are part of the users. The user, we have category, we have the lecturers, we have the students, also we have the admin. So I'll simply call the user model, which is what represents our user table. So now I want to filter only the student, just like when you are running your normal SQL, you select all from users where the user type is equal to student. But here in Laravel, we have the eloquent query builder to help us get those things instead of writing the native SQL statement. So I can simply say where, okay, now my feed, this where can receive 3 arguments, okay, can receive 3 arguments, but for shortcuts we normally use 2 arguments. Now the first one will be the feed, the second one will be the operator, while the third one will be the value. Okay, like for instance, I want to say where user type, I think that is how I called it in my database. If we check what we have on the database, okay, if we check what we have in the database, I think on my own database I created it under this, okay, manager. So if we have the user, sorry about that. Okay, we have, okay, user underscore type. Okay, so we're going to simply say user underscore type here. Okay, so where user underscore type is equal to students. Okay, now I will simply say I want to get this empty. Okay, when I say get, this will return the students for me. So if I return this variable called students, let's see what we get in return from the variable. Okay, so with this now, I'm simply going to refresh my page, and when I refresh my page, I get an array of students. Okay, now I have the length of the array just 1, that means I only have 1 student here, okay, which is James Hadley. Okay, so that is how you can do this. But normally, if we omit this second one and just do this, it's also we get the student the way it was. So there's no actual difference, except you want to do some heavy lifting. That's where you will use the second parameter, which is the one that is in the middle. That means if we want to do heavy lifting, see, we get exactly what we needed. Okay, so the major thing is once we get the array, we are supposed to use the array to pour the information about the students here in this student table, the student page rather. Okay, so another thing again is we can return the response in form of JSON in case we want to return multiple items from the database. We can just return it in form of JSON by doing this. Okay, forget about the header. Now this status is also optional. Okay, the major thing is the data I want to return, and the data that I want to return will be an array which should be converted into a JSON format. Okay, so I can say students. Okay, now students, okay, as a string will be equal to this my students. Okay, now this is simply going to bring it in form of JSON, so that in case we have to return other things like this, we can simply add those things here and assign it to their value. That means if we are not returning just students. Okay, so that is for that one. But now we're returning only students, so let's just leave the students out. Okay, the only thing that's going to change here now is, instead of giving us just the array, just like we've seen, instead of just giving us the array, it's going to give us the students as a key, and the array of all students will be assigned to it. Okay, so let's refresh this and see. See, we have the students as a key for an object, then the student contain an array of what? Students. Okay, so that is what we'll get here. So what we're going to do, since we're getting a student as a key from the data that are coming from the backend, now on the front end we have to handle how we want to use the students. Remember, we created an empty array of students here. So what we're going to do now is we'll try to get the data that comes back from the back end. We'll get the data that comes back from the back end. Then the data will now be assigned to the students that we have here. So how do we do that? We can simply say students, okay, which is the student at the top here, will be equal to the response we have here dot data dot dot students. Okay, now these students will be the array of students will be passed into this particular students. Okay, now if you watch here, if you have your view dev tool, now if you watch here, initially you're going to see that our students array is empty. Okay, so if I refresh this now, I don't think I've saved it. Okay, let me save this. Okay, when I refresh this now, you're going to see that when the page loads up, it's going to simply apply that fetch all the data into our student array. That means our student array, we have one object in it, which is everything about the students. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is, how can I populate that student here? Okay, that is actually very simple. Now the major thing is this, we've gotten this, but before I do that, now sometimes we might have error while working with our backend, so we have to also do a catch. Okay, now the catch is also a method that will receive an exception. Okay, now the catch, sorry, okay, just the way I did the then statement, I'll simply say e. Okay, also a method. Okay, now we can log the e here. Okay, so we can log the e here. Now later I'm going to modify that to check if the error is actually okay. Let me just do that now. I'll do something like if e dot response, if the e have a response, sorry, if e have a response, okay, that means the actual error is from our backend, or something from the HTTP request we did. That means our response, our request actually hits the backend and came back. Okay, that means you have a response, there's a response in it. Okay, but else if there is no response, okay, that means our 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 request was unable to finish what it's meant to do, then probably, okay, it's not always, but probably it might be due to network. That means you're trying to get something, but the network is, maybe the network is bad or something like that. Okay, so let me just put network here. We can as well fine tune or write a better message for that later. Sorry, I've forgotten where my key is. Okay, that is just it. But what I'm doing here is that I'm logging it on the console so that the user don't have to see this. Okay, but in case if it's a request that you want the user to see, we are going to also create modals that we're going to work with, that will show like a success modal, the error modal, and stuff like that. Okay, so this is for this is for this error. If we have error, just like in some programs you have the try and catch. Okay, so now for us to populate this into our card, remember we have the cards. This is the cards. Okay, now what we're going to do is we are going to use a v-for, okay, to loop the cards. Okay, now we're going to loop the card in such a way that we're going to get all students and their index, since we are dealing with an array, in the array called students. Okay, so each loop we have to differentiate each of these with a key, which is the index. Okay, I like doing it like this. Okay, but sometimes we can as well, just there are other ways we can do this. Okay, so when I differentiate this, I'm trying to get students in student. That's for each student in students. Okay, if you want to really talk about it in a grammatical way, say for each student in students. Okay, now what do we want to do with for each student in students? Now the first thing we want to do, okay, just let's say we want to get something about, let's say, their first name and last name. Okay, so I'll simply do something like this. Say student dot first name, student of first name. Okay, sorry about that. First name. Yeah. So let's just say student of first name, but everything we need will be on the students. Okay, so after doing this, and I refresh my page, I'm going to get the first name of the students in the card. Okay, now assuming we have other students, let me log out user here. Okay, let's say I register a new student. Let's say I say the name of the student is Amina Sani. Okay, then let's say Amina Sani at yahoo.com. Okay, and the password is simply 1234567 1234567 and I hit enter. Okay, to register the student. Okay, sorry, I have an error here. .com. So when I register, I have a new student called Amina Sani. Okay, so when I go over to this guy and I refresh my page, you find out that I have a new student called Amina Sani. Okay, that is Amina. Okay, you know, I just did just the first name. Okay, I can do both the first name and last name. I can do whatever I want to here. Okay, and that thing again is that I can still order, though this for the people that will be handling backend. I can still order by saying order by. Okay, I want to order the students by let's say their first name. Okay, and I order by first name. I'll also do if ascending or descending. Okay, but normally it's ascending if I'm ordering by name, so that the one with A will come first. Okay, so with this, if I refresh my page, I'm going to get them in a proper order. Okay, so as I add student, the more I add student, the more I'll get more students, more cards generating here. Okay, so now another thing I want to do here now. Okay, let me just do something here. Let me just do something here very quick. Okay, I'm going to make this thing a grid as well. Okay, I want to make it a grid. Now this grid, I'm not going to make it responsive, but the grid I need it to be a grid of let's say 4 columns. That's columns 4. Okay, now and I have a grid of 4 columns. Now the gap between the grids there will not be gap, so I'll say gap 0. Now that means I'll have 4. I can have multiple whatsoever here, but what I want to do here now is I'll have 2 div here. Okay, so div times 2. Okay, now in this last div, I'm going to give it a class of, let's say, this particular one will have column span of 3. Okay, now when I have column span of 3, what I'm simply trying to do is this one will take 1, then this one will take 3 out of the proposed 4 columns that we need. Okay, so if I do this, I can simply do something like, let's say, a strong element. Then I will have let's say the students. Okay, first of all, okay, let me just do this. I will modify that. Student dot the first name of the student. First name of the student. Okay, so I can still do the same thing again and say I need the last name of the student as well here. Okay, now what I want to do here is I would copy this, put it inside a H2 or a H whatever. Let me say H4. Okay, put it there. Okay, now then I can also add, let's say, what else can we add about the student? Let's say we want to add okay, we've not added, okay, we've not really done anything much actually, because we're supposed to add, let's say, the level of the student as well, but we don't have anything like of such, so we're going to remodify the database actually. So but for now, let me just put the email of the students there. Okay, so let's say we'll have padding. Okay, and inside the padding we'll have we'll have no longer in the strong this time around. We'll have the email of the students. Okay, so we'll have the email of the students there. Now what I tend doing here is I tend bringing in the picture of the image. I think I have something relating to that in my side nav. Okay, so I'm just going to copy this guy. Sorry, not here. This guy. Okay, I can copy this guy. Okay, so I'll put it here, but this time around I'm not getting the actual user that is logged in, but rather I'm trying to get the student's profile picture. Okay, so I'll simply say the source here should be equal to the student profile picture. Now another thing again I want to point out for those of us that are not used to this is that when you want to add a variable into an attribute just like this, you have to bind the attribute. That is why we have this. Okay, but if it's not inside an attribute, you have to close it with the curly braces. Okay, that is just how it is. So binding the attribute simply means that you want to work with a variable inside the attribute. That is why you have this colon as back of the source. Like if I remove this column, it will look like your normal source which will receive anything. Okay, so and I cannot come here and do my curly brace, it won't work. Okay, so what you do is you bind the attribute and you pass the variable into the attributes. Okay, so with this let's refresh our page and see what we have on the page. Okay, so we have Amina and their picture, the James and whatever. Okay, so I think with this, I think we will need the gap after all. We need the gap after all between them. So I will simply say gap. Let's say 2. Okay, so let's say 2, or we cannot. Okay, let's just say 2 first and see how it looks like. But what I was thinking of is we can actually just do padding. Okay, and so just do padding there. Okay, now okay, I think it's okay like this. So these are the students. Another thing again, I said something like when we click on this student, it should be able to, take us to another place where the entire detail of that particular student is going to show up. Okay, so now what I'm going to do here is simply I'm going to cover this whole thing in a link. Okay, so I'm going to create, now I'm not going to use the normal link, I'm going to use the initial link. Okay, now the initial link is also with the initial JS. Okay, now with the initial link we can be able to do a particular anchor that is not going to load our page. Okay, that means it will just go straight to the particular link without loading our page. Okay, so I'm going to set a hyper reference to it, and I'll set it to maybe just an empty reference for now. Okay, just leave it empty for now, so we are not really actually going anywhere. But with this, it will be that whole card, the whole content of the card will be a link. Okay, I think the problem we have is grid. Okay, so sorry, let me reverse this. Okay, so I think I'm going to make this the initial link. Okay, so when I make this the initial link, okay, let's see how it looks first before we conclude. Okay, I think I have an error somewhere. Initial link. Okay, let me say hyperreference is equal to something, and I save this. Yeah, I don't see where my okay, I've seen the error. Okay, so the error was I omitted one of this div here. Okay, I think that should be the error. Still having an error. Okay. Okay, so I don't seem to see the error, but let's see what we have here. Okay, if the error were not allow page to load. Okay, it's loading and it's now become a link. Okay, So I don't know why this error is still showing up here, because I can't seem to find the error, except for the fact that maybe because we gave this grid the link itself. Okay, I'm going to do this after this video. I'm going to correct that, maybe probably make the link above, or make just the images and the write-ups be link and leave the grid the way it was. I think that should be, let me just revert the whole thing. Okay, I think that should be better. That means the image can be covered in the link. Okay, okay, the initial link. Okay, okay, so image will be covered in the link. It's on a hyperreference of an empty server. Then the whole content, the entire content of this guy as well, will be covered with the link. Okay, so I think with this, we do to not be the card this time around that will be link, but the content of the card. Okay, that means we can actually click on the image as well as this guy. Something again went wrong again. Okay, we reverted this guy as well, so we bring it back to 2. So this will give us exactly what we want. Okay, so now this card of students that are available for us. Okay, now the last thing I'm going to talk about, because this video is 1 hour plus already, going to 2 hours. So let me just talk about the last thing, which is assuming we want to separate some of all these things that we've done already. Normally what I did here should be okay for what we're trying to do, but just because of learning, and I want to demonstrate how we can work with components outside our page. That means what we're supposed to do to make the work easier is all our pages are going to be on this page folder according to our structure, our application structure, on this page folder. Then we cannot build smaller components inside this components folder. Okay, so let's assume I have the student cards as a component in my component folder. Let's say students card. Okay, dot view. Okay, now if I have student cards here, that means I'll have, let's say, my view whatsoever here. Okay, now in this student card, I'm going to copy this whole thing here. Now I'm going to copy this whole thing and place it inside the student card. Okay, so now that I have this whole thing, then the next thing I'm going to bring in is these variables that I'm using here, because there's nothing like such. Okay, so I'm also going to bring in this whole thing I did here. Okay, this whole thing I did here, because actually it is what this guy is using. So I'm going to bring everything here. Okay, everything here. Then I'll simply save this. Then here we no longer need this guy, but we might need other things with it, so we'll leave it blank. We don't longer need this, and as well as we no longer need this. Okay, so the only thing we need here now is to import the student card. That is import I think my own listing can give me student card. I think so. Okay, has imported the student card for me, but I don't like the way it imported this. Say student card view. Okay, I'll just leave it as student card. Then I'll have to register it here, student card, in my components. Okay, and when I register it in my component, I can simply just come here and say student card. Okay, so that is all. So I just simply bring in the student card and I will get exactly the same thing I have gotten before now. Okay, I think let's see what the error could be. It's saying student card reference HTTP not defined. Okay, yeah. The error is the HTTP we're using it here. So without the HTTP client, the student card cannot make this request. So we have to as well bring in the HTTP client here. Okay. So with this, student card is going to make the request and give us what we want. Okay. So exactly the same thing that we had. Okay. But this time around, you see that we've simply separated the component. That means someone can just be vested with the task of building the student card, while someone else will be building something else. At the end of the day, we can bring the components together within that particular page. Okay, now this is some of the ways we can work with this. I know this video is lengthy. I know it's very lengthy, but I think we should just try and watch it from the beginning to the end, so that because we're going to see a lot of ways and familiarize ourselves with the structure of how we are going to work with this project and subsequent projects that we'll be working with. Okay, mind you, the reason for this project is just for us to familiarize with how we can work as a team, number one, and how we can work on different projects to be faster, and at the same time how we can learn more things to add to what we already know. Okay, so these are some of the things. So please beg you to try and watch this video. I know I'm saying this at the end already, but I'm still going to indicate that the video is very long. Okay, so I'll add these videos to the Zoom playlist, and we're going to see it. So after watching this video, I believe we should be able to start working. Okay, thank you very much.